Everyone, this is Megan Phillips. This is part 2 of our Racism Professional Development, where today we're going to talk about the relationship to education and relationship to curriculum. Hopefully everyone was able to watch this video, and it's called Fighting Racism in Schools, and it's from 2017, and it's a forum with 4 Native American youth speaking about their experiences in school, from kindergarten to college, and everything that they faced while attending school. So they talk about the stereotypes, the bias in curriculum, all while sharing their personal stories, their personal feelings about not being represented within school, and kind of the misconceptions that everyone had. Everything that we really hope to eliminate. So today we're going to talk about kind of everything that they mentioned in this video. Before we do that, let's go ahead and pause and talk. How do you encounter racism within your teaching, within your school, and within your curriculum? What does it look like? Okay, so this is what we're mainly going to focus on today. Racism within the educational system and racism within the curriculum. So when we're talking about racism within the educational system, we talk about segregation, school funding, and unequal learning opportunities. I put the arrows because I feel like one thing really leads to the next. So we know that schools today are increasingly more segregated. There's a continued presence of racism, right? It did not end when desegregation occurred. So we know we have a segregated housing market, and we know that that leads to segregated schools, right? We discussed this a lot in part 1. When you have segregated housing markets, that also allows for unequal distribution of funds within schools. So when you think about houses paying property taxes, the higher the value of your home is, the higher your property tax will be. And in some cases, not every school is like this, that allows for a very disproportionate funding allowed for schooling. And then we know that that leads to inferior schools for our poor students, where our youth of color, it's very disproportionate, right? Because they're living there, they're renting there, and maybe the cost of homes is lower there. And that all means less money and more money for students on the other end of the spectrum. And when we're talking about unequal distribution of funds, that really leads to unequal learning opportunities. And we know that in lower achievement is more prevalent in our higher poverty schools. So the way that unequal learning opportunities presents themselves, there's a lot. One being teachers. Teachers are so important. And in schools, in some schools, they're going to be less qualified, just really less strict requirements. Maybe how many years of experience they've had doesn't matter. If they're certified or not, that's not going to matter. And that's probably the biggest disparity among schools, is how well trained their teachers are in teacher experience. There's also fewer resources, a limited, less challenging curriculum, and fewer educational resources as well. So all of these things impact academic achievement, which we know impacts their graduation rates, their college acceptance rates, and really kind of sets the tone for the rest of their lives, right? It's so important. School's so important. Now, not every school is going to have more or less money based on the property taxes that people are paying. And we know that here within North Carolina, schools also have the opportunity to privately raise funds, though. And those private funds may be used for a larger library within the school, more technology, field trips, maybe traveling abroad opportunities. Maybe they have a music and art teachers where other schools have those positions cut, teachers, assistants. All of these little things just expand the inequality of our schools. Now, if funding is equal, which is rare, it still exists, though. And when I'm talking about money, it really does go hand in hand with race, as we know from our first PowerPoint, because there are certain groups that are overrepresented when we're talking about poverty. And we learned this last time. So, physical structures, their teachers, and this is a big one, rigor within the curriculum. So I want you to, we're going to save that for after, actually. Let's go ahead and take a look at racism within our curriculum. And let's look at the content. So we know we live in a white-dominated society, and that's reflected completely within our curriculum, right? When we look at our history books, who's admitted, who's not. When we look at our teachers, like 90% of teachers are white. The stories that we're telling our students, really the entire physical setup of our schools and within our classroom, we're really bombarded with white dominant society. There's a lot of distortions within our curriculum. There is a lot of stories and views and people that are omitted when we're thinking about the content. Let me give you an example of that. So that's like if we are talking about science and we're studying great scientists and we're only talking about white men and what they've done. And we know that those are not the only white men are not the only scientists out there. That's kind of an example of this. When we're thinking about content, something else to also consider is testing and how much of an influence testing, unfortunately, has on our standardized testing has within our curriculum. We really kind of trim a lot of our curriculum based on what's going to be on that end of year assessment and what's not. So that really cuts into it even more. It makes us even more prevalent within our curriculum. Also, we have to think about the content on the test, who's creating tests, and I feel like it's kind of perpetuating that cycle of dominance and what's within our curriculum, who's represented within our curriculum, who it's serving, that type of stuff. Something else that's missing within the content of our curriculum, speaking from an elementary standpoint, there's really not much information about racism. If we do talk about it, it's more of something that happened a long time ago, isolated acts, a few mean people, that type of thing. And if we're not able to talk about this, how are we able to think critically about this? And it seems a lot, and this isn't for everyone, right? And not every single teacher is doing this. When we don't talk about it, that makes us think like, oh, maybe this doesn't exist. When we talk about racism, we talk about Dr. Martin Luther King. That's gone. That's not here anymore. So it's so important to be having those conversations, as uncomfortable as they may be at first. Let's go ahead into the hidden curriculum. So this is, I think, in my opinion, one of the most important parts of this. It's kind of our unofficial curriculum. It's unintended, and it's not taught, right? So it's kind of our norms and values, our beliefs, and really our interactions with our students. So this could be, how's your wait time when you are talking with your Black students? Are you calling on your Hispanic? Is everyone really represented? Because that's part of the hidden curriculum as well. And it's incredibly influential and really powerful. If we're talking about great scientists and we're only talking about white men, that's part of our curriculum. But guess what? We're also telling them there's no female scientists. There are no Chinese scientists. It's incredibly important, and we really need to look critically within our curriculum and think about, what am I doing? Who's not represented? What am I not saying here? Who's not included, that type of stuff. Now, teacher bias is another aspect of racism within our curriculum. And so researchers have found that students who think that their teachers believe in them are more successful. So teachers, we are so important. Research has also found that a high percentage of teachers believe that maybe their class is too difficult for their Asian, Black, or Latino students, and the greatest gap being with their views amongst their Black students. So teacher bias is also kind of perpetuating that cycle of racism. And when we're underestimating our students, that is going to have really long-lasting effects on them and our society. So we know that our teachers are mostly white, and our urban schools are mostly made up of students of color, and that really presents a gap that exists. And when we think about teacher bias, where I personally look, and the more information that I learned about all of this, I look back at my teacher prep programs and what it consisted of, and it didn't consist of anything like this. When we think about teacher bias, that's really frightening, that maybe things are not the same ethnicity, socially, racially, linguistically. Our backgrounds are completely different. All of that is so different. But then teachers are, when we think about something like tracking, and you have a kindergartner or a first grader and you're making choices for them and you don't understand everything that's going on, yet the tracks that you're putting them on are going to affect them for the rest of their schooling, which really, as we know, has a huge impact on the rest of their lives. So let's go ahead and pause and talk. And I want you to think about your curriculum that you're teaching right now. And I want you to think about, who is it serving? Is everyone represented? Is it one-sided? Is it true? A lot of times when we think about our curriculum, we think it's known that it's not factual and it's not neutral, and it's really serving someone else. So I want you to talk to your teammates about your current curriculum. Okay, I wanted to revisit this once more. We saw this in our last PowerPoint, but now I feel like we're more ready to discuss this. So this was just about North Carolina and our student population, and looking at how our Black, who's in the blue, and our Hispanic in the yellow in the bottom portion, are overrepresented when it comes to free and reduced lunch, which we know, we talked about that with our last one, but also our discipline, and then also our AP classes. And this, just not to be confused, I said that kind of confusing. When we look at the opportunity, it's white students are this number of times more likely to be in an AP class compared with a Black student. Let's talk about it. So why does it look like this? How did this happen? And we're going to end here with a couple of critical questions. Is it your job as an educator to teach about racism? What can we do about racism that is embedded within our curriculums and within our school systems? We know it's true. We know it's there. Okay, so let's look at your individual classroom. Are you reproducing racial inequality? I'm sure you're not doing this on purpose. But look around, look at your books. What types of stories are we telling? Or are you dismantling it? Here are my references.